Hello, weaving people. Susan here. I've been away from my first true love, the Union 36. I've been working on some scarves for Christmas on my 4-shaft loom, working with twill. So that's kind of what I've been working on. I need to finish that up. But I wanted to talk about log cabin today. And I think I may have talked about this before, but I make videos on whatever I'm currently working on. So if I get repetitious, just don't watch. So this bag is made with the same threading that I'm using for my log cabin, but in this case, I'm weaving just plain weave. So first one shaft and the other shaft, and it's just my rugs. And so you can see that with the threading that I threaded dark light, dark light, dark light. So when one shaft is up, we get the dark, and when the other shaft is up, we see the light. And then these sections are all threaded with light. And these bags are, I'm using a thinner rag weft sheets for these. And so this kind of looks kind of summery. And a good source book is the Rag Rug Handbook, and this is by Janet Meany and Paula Pfaff. And so if you're getting into weaving rag rugs, this is a good source. And they have a section in here where they talk about different variations on the log cabin threading. So they have quite a few different examples, and of course you can, once you get the basics down, then you could do your own. And there's a few color examples in the books of what you could do. This table runner is the same threading that I'm working on today. And so here I'm also changing the color of rags when I change whether it's a dark or a light thread that's up. So that's another variation that you can go with, is what your weft is going to be. So, and of course, if I can, so the opposite side, if it was white that was up here, then the opposite side is going to have the opposite color, the black up. So that's kind of how that works. And so this is what I'm weaving today. And just so you can kind of see how this works. So I'm just using the same color. And I don't know if you'll be able to see in the video, but in my threading, in these dark and light sections, it's all the dark threads are on one shaft and all the light warps are on the other shaft. And so it's dark light, dark light. And so when I lift one shaft, only the light colored threads are up. And when I lift the other shaft, then we see the dark. And of course, in these sections in between, they're all light. And I could have threaded these so that these light sections were also in the log cabin patterning, and so reversing that. But I just did these little sections. And so I'm using only one color of weft here. And I like to use a temple for these. When you're messing around with a selvage so much, I think a temple is a good thing to use. Some people don't like to use a temple. That's totally up to you. So between each pick of the rags, I'm using a thinner thread. This is like a 5-2 cotton. You could use, a lot of people use the same thin thread as they use for their warp. It shows up more, and it's just kind of up to you. And you could choose a color that blends in with your rags, or one that stands out. So if I had chosen to use like a red, I'd get a completely different effect. And something I haven't tested out, because there's so many variations, the more I think about it, there's so many different variations that you can do with this. What if I used an even thicker thread for the weft that goes in between the rags, to really make it show up. So, like maybe like a 3-2 that was maybe a little thicker. So lots of different things, and that's just kind of up to you. My rags that I'm using are sheets, and they're cut about 1 inch thick because this is either going to be a bag or a table runner. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but I'm going to weave it long enough to make a bag. It'll be like 30 inches long, or a tabletop or so. Okay, so in the section that I'm working with, I want my light warp threads to be up. Oh, the other thing I should say about my setup here is that I have a floating selvage on each side, and I have doubled it. And a floating selvage is a warp thread on either side of your weaving that does not go through a kettle on your shafts. And the advantage of using a floating selvage is that you're going to catch that each time you weave back and forth, and you don't have to mess around with trying to wrap your weft around a warp thread to catch at the end and make it more uniform. So I just finished with a thin thread, so I want my light threads to be up, and as you can see I just have one little end here. So, and I am going, when I enter I go over the floating selvage, and when I exit the shed I go under. And so, you can find a lot of information about using a floating selvage on the web. So if I think I'm going to do something where I need a floating selvage, I'll just go ahead, when I thread the loom, I'll go ahead and put that in and use it even when I'm doing a plain weave. So I went over, and now I'm coming out under my floating selvage. Match these up. I didn't sew these together because I was thinking I was going to be changing colors all the time, so I didn't want to take the time to make my weft continuous by sewing or knotting or whatever. And I kind of have a pattern, so when my first shuttle goes through the shed, I put this one closest to me. And it's easy to kind of forget which shed, but you'll know right away if your pattern changes. So if I'm wanting light up here and I get dark, then I know that I went through the wrong shed. Okay, so I'm going to put this shuttle closest to me, and it takes a little bit of messing around with your selvages because you've got these threads in here wrapping around. So kind of once you get going, it's okay. I had just advanced my warp, so I'm kind of getting back. So in between every pick of the rags, goes a thin thread. So you just start alternating. And I have this, I want these to end up to be roughly squares. So I figured that if I have 7 picks of the rags, that's going to give me the distance that I want before I change. Oops. Well. And there's no reason that you can't put all kinds of variations in this. Of course, once you have your loom threaded, you're not going to be changing that, but you can do all kinds of different things with your weft. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is going to be my last row before I change. And I move my temple up fairly regularly because I've got all this stuff going on at the selvage. And I have the ends of my rags are tapered so they kind of... Since this is going to be either for a table runner or a bag, I wanted it to be a little bit neater than if I was doing a rug. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so now I'm going to change. So when you change, which, whoops, let me go back here. Change the shed here. Okay, so you throw a pick just like you would after every pick of the rags, but then in order to change so that now my black threads are going to be back on top, I have to change the shed and throw 2 picks of the thinner thread. And I put that one closest to me. And now the black are on top. You'll know right away if you did something wrong if the threads are not the color you want in the place that you want. So just remember, when you want to change, you have to throw 2 picks of your thin thread, thin weft. I've got a big mess here. Let's just get rid of that. I'm sure you'll do a better job of controlling your weft. Since this may be a bag, it won't really matter if my selvage is a little not neat, because I'm going to sew. I'll sew these. And I like to move my temple up as I go along. I think that kind of helps to kind of manage that. Oops. I mess up regularly where I have to unweave a couple of picks, but hopefully I catch it pretty quickly, so I only have to unweave a couple of throws. And of course you could alternate this. Let's see. I have to think about if I'm going over my floating selvage or under it. If your floating selvage gets a little loose, you can always put an S hook on the back of the loom to kind of weight that down if it needs to be weighted. Yeah, and something else you could do with this, other than playing around with how many picks and where you change colors, is you could also go back to just simply weaving plain weave. So let's see. So if I wanted to, I'm not going to do it on this piece, but you know, you could combine this with simply going back and forth and weaving with plain weave to add a little more variation in there. So, okay, that's all I have to say about Log Cabin. Try it out. It's kind of fun. It takes longer, of course, because you have to kind of pay attention to your selvage, and you have to throw an extra pick in there to separate out your colors. But other than that, go back to my regular. Okay, have a good day.